What we're looking at here is a fully 3D printable ATX NAS case. What makes this case special is that it's printable on even tiny printers like the Prusa Mini or A1 Mini, thanks to many clever design features allowing us to join and interlock many smaller parts into becoming a functional and sturdy case, taking DIY NAS to the next level. This case can hold up to a total of 12 3.5-inch hard drives, graphics cards up to 245mm, air coolers up to 160mm tall, tons of mounting points for cable management, as well as SFX and ATX power supplies, while still having full access to all PCIe slots. Behind the cables, we have fans that actively cool the drive base by pulling in fresh air in between the drives to ensure a comfortable environment for the drives, all in a sturdy and easy to build package. You know what else is sturdy and easy to build? The sponsor of this video, FlexiSpot, with their super sturdy 4-legged adjustable standing desk, the E7 Plus. More about that later in the video. Many of you may remember this ATX case I built last year. And as you can probably tell, I did take some inspiration from that case when designing this, at least on the outside. In my previous case, there was limited PCIe slot access, while in the new design all slots are fully accessible and usable thanks to the power supply now being underneath the motherboard instead of partially blocking it. The airflow is also a bit changed here. Since this is a NAS case, the main goal is to make sure that the hard drives stay comfortable, so therefore I've opted for having the air intake on the back side of the case to ensure that fresh air can be pulled in between the drives, then to be exhausted out the back. The design was created using Shaper 3D, and the build consists of a combination of slide-in-place parts and screws to ensure optimal stiffness, and almost every part of the build is also individually numbered to easily keep track of which part is which. One of the things that I'm especially proud of is that the entire drive bay was designed in a way that all 4 parts can be printed at the same time on a single 180mm print bed, and I've also done my best to pre-arrange multiple parts within a 180mm surface in many of the STLs to save on the amount of total prints required. When all the parts are printed, it should look something like this. For all the grey printed parts, I personally went for this matte PLA by FormFutura called Gunmetal Grey Camouflage, while all black parts, like for example the drive base, are in my case printed in generic non-branded PETG. This video is intended as an instruction to give you a general idea of how this case is built, but the full step-by-step guide with all the details will be available on the project page on printables shortly after posting this. To start the build, we want to arrange the 6 panels with the motherboard standoffs on them. The part numbers and order of arrangement should be displayed on the screen. Next, we have a special joining piece with part number 12 on it, and another number stating the part's tolerance. Also keep in mind these arrows indicating which side should face up. Next, we can grab the second joint, which is part number 13. This one has arrows facing the opposite way, indicating that this one should be at the bottom. The panel pieces simply slide onto the joint, starting with the 2 45-degree pieces on the lower joint, followed by the 2 45-degree pieces on the upper joint. Also keep in mind this little notch on the corner of each part that should lock the panel in place once it's pushed all the way into the joint. We can then grab the middle pieces one by one to join the top and bottom part, turning these 8 parts into one single panel. We can now grab some M3 threaded inserts and melt them into all of the motherboard standoffs. We also need to add 3 inserts to the upper left side of the panel as pointed out here. Again, all threaded insert locations will be specified in the written instructions over on printables. We can now get started building the drive bay, and as you can see, each part has a number. Starting with part number 1, which has the logo on it, we can grab part 2 and carefully slide it into the corner tracks in part 1. Also pay attention to the track in the middle between the parts. Next, we can grab part 3 and slide it into the opposite corner of part number 1. And I think you get the point here. Part 4 then slides into the tracks of part 2 and 3, and also the track in the middle between the parts. And just like that, our single print drive bay is now in one piece. And here we want to add a bunch of threaded inserts to both sides, the back side, the front, and a few on the underside. Basically, if you see a hole on this specific part, you want to add an insert. Next, we can grab panel 22, 21, and 20. These panels require special slicer settings to get the mesh effect. They will also be clearly marked in their file names, so please pay attention to each individual file name as they may contain important information. In the slicer, these 3 parts will show up as solid pieces like this. The settings we then want to use are 5 walls, 0 top layers, 0 bottom layers, infill 20%, and infill pattern honeycomb. The file should now slice with the perforated pattern and can be sent to the printer. Keep in mind, only use this method for part 20, 21 and 22. To mount these panels, we'll need some M3 by 10mm screws, and this will be the standard screw size for all parts of this build. Here we want to insert screws into each one of the countersunk holes and align them with the threaded inserts. Our drive bay is now incredibly sturdy and ready to handle the weight of up to 12 hard drives. At this point we can continue adding threaded inserts to the rest of our parts. Since there are quite a few inserts to melt in place, I've made a written instruction on printables on where to add every single insert in this build. When all inserts are in place, we can lay out the motherboard panel next to our drive bay and look for part number 11. This part slides nicely into the upper left corner of our drive bay. Following this, we can do the same with part number 10 by sliding that into part number 11 the same way. Let's now grab panel 5 and slide it into the lower left corner of the drive bay, followed by panel 6, which has a cutout for the power supply air intake. Panel 8 is our power supply mounting bracket. This one screws into place using 2 screws into the edge of panel 6. We can then proceed to add panel 9, which holds all of our PCI slots and mounting points. This one mounts to panel 10 at the top using 2 screws, to panel 6 using 1 screw, and to panel 8 using 2 more screws. Finally, we can grab part 23 and add that to the inside of the I/O shield opening. This one mounts to the motherboard back panel. At this point, we can flip our entire assembly around and start securing the motherboard back panel to the frame. Again, here we want to just add M3 screws to all available holes around the edge. The holes are strategically placed to optimize case stiffness by overlapping parts, creating super strong interlocking forces. Due to printing size limitations for the drive bay, we need to add part number 7 manually to the lower front part of the case. This one acts as a foot. And just like that, we've now got a super sturdy chassis ready for some heavy parts. You know what else is super steady and ready for some heavy parts? The sponsor of this video, FlexiSpot. Many of you guys have probably at some point considered getting a standing desk for your office. However, when you see the final price, you're like, damn! Well, that's where FlexiSpot comes into the picture, offering a wide variety of high-quality standing desks, office chairs, and a lot more at super affordable prices compared to many of their competitors. FlexiSpot were nice enough to send me one of their 4-legged standing desks, the E7 Plus, and I must say I love this thing. The desk comes with easy-to-follow instructions, making this desk a dream to build in no time. Even though the desk comes standard with adjustable feet, I instead opted for the optional premium lockable wheels accessory, and you'll see why soon. The desk frame is fully adjustable in the width and can support desktops ranging from 120cm to 180cm, and I opted for the 180cm wide dark walnut option. Thanks to its 4-legged dual motor design, it's pretty much wobble-free unless you're really trying. And it's also got a huge weight capacity of up to 540 pounds or roughly 245 kilograms, while still moving super smoothly up and down with barely any vibration. The control panel also has a practical USB port built in to easily charge all of your smaller devices, and I've actually been using this port way more than I expected. By simply unlocking the wheels and unplugging the power cable, I'm able to completely reorganize my office in a matter of minutes, since I also have wheels on my other workbench. This is especially practical for my situation when filming a video to get the perfect angle. Just having the flexibility to seamlessly go from sitting down working to standing up and varying the working position throughout the day is really great to avoid back pain from sitting too much. And the weight capacity and stability of the desk is great for supporting projects like the one you're watching right now, which happens to weigh a lot due to all the hard drives. Even at an elevated position, the overall wobble is minimal considering my 220-pound body is jumping on it. And of course, there are other features built in like being able to save your favorite heights, etc. Especially handy if you're more than one person sharing the desk. If you happen to be in the market for a standing desk, I can highly recommend checking out the FlexiSpot E7 Plus and their other options through the link down below. You can even get an additional $50 off your E7 Plus by using the promo code YTE7P50. Now, let's get back to the project. Since the main body is done, we can now move on to our magnetic side panel. Here we can start by laying out all 9 pieces on a table like this, and we want to install threaded inserts into all the visible holes. Next, we want to grab the joining pieces. These are 4 identical pieces of part number 33. Here we have the part number and the tolerance setting. How this works is that the middle panel, number 28, acts as a hub for all 4 joining pieces, and we want to create an X shape by sliding them all in towards the middle. We can then add part number 34, which locks all the 4 parts into place with a single M3 screw, preventing all the joining pieces from sliding back out. We can now start adding the panel pieces to the middle hub, starting with all the 4 corner pieces, followed by the 4 pieces that go in between them. We now want to grab 4 pieces of part number 35. These need to be screwed in place on all 4 sides using M3 screws. These pieces join all the outer panels together, preventing any of them from being able to move in any direction to ensure that the panel holds its shape and stiffness. The panel should now fit nicely onto our chassis. However, for it to keep itself in place, we need to add some magnets. And here we're using 8x3mm neodymium magnets. As most of us know, magnets usually have different polarities on opposite sides. And in my opinion, the easiest way to ensure correct magnet polarity is to simply grab a stack of magnets like this. Then we want to push all magnets into the holes from the same side of the stack, making sure to never flip the stack when we're going. Then continue this around the whole panel. We can also gently tap them into place if the holes feel a little tight. And if they feel too loose, we can also use some super glue. If we then want to add magnets to our opposite part, which is the chassis, we can simply grab a stack of magnets, attach it to one of the magnets already installed, then flip it 180 degrees and make sure to push all the magnets from that side into all the magnet holes on the chassis. This way we can ensure that all the magnets will stick to each other. And again, if this is done right, our side panel should now snap perfectly into place and stay there. We're now ready to start installing some components, and this case supports mini ATX, micro ATX and ATX sized motherboards, like for example this one that secures in place to the standoffs using regular M3 screws. Next, we can add our ATX power supply, and here we have tons of space, so even the longer ATX power supplies will fit in here just fine. If we're going to use a GPU, that can be added right now. This particular one is a 5070 Founders Edition, and I'm specifically showing you this card because it happens to be exactly as long as the maximum size supported by this case at 245mm long. Hold up. If you're still here at this point, chances are you might actually enjoy watching this type of content. Why not consider subscribing to the channel so you don't miss out on future projects like this one? And if you're sitting on a cool project idea that you're unable to create yourself, share it down in the comments. If I like it enough, maybe your idea can turn into a future project video. With our motherboard, power supply and graphics card in place, we can now move on to our hard drives. Each hard drive has to be fitted with 2 sliding brackets, one with a built-in latching mechanism and the other one just as a sliding guide for the track. The latching mechanism attaches to the right side of each drive, using a minimum of 2 screws per bracket per side. The drive can now be slid perfectly into the slots in the drive bay with a satisfying click at the end. As you can see, each drive mount also has a built-in spring that keeps tension on the locking mechanism so the drive stays securely in place. And to remove a drive, simply clamp your fingers together and pull the drive out. Inserting all these drives is actually super satisfying, and it's kind of fun playing around with the springy mechanism too. At this point, it's really starting to look like a NAS with all those drives in place. The ATX motherboard I installed previously is actually broken, and I installed it just as a proof of concept, so let me just swap this out with this micro ATX board real quick. Now, most motherboards do not have 12 SATA ports available for all these drives, so to get enough SATA ports you're gonna want to use some kind of expansion card. Like for example this LSI 9300 16i card that supports up to 16 SATA drives using these SAS to SATA splitter cables. However, I'm not saying that this expansion card is the best way to go. I actually have very little overall NAS experience, so please do your own research on what parts are best for your specific needs. When it comes to installing the graphics card or other expansion cards, one thing to note is that you need to manually remove the covers for the slots you're planning to use. For example, here the GPU requires the 2 upper slots. We can then simply use filament cutters or a similar tool to carefully cut away the required slot covers before installing our GPU or other expansion card. As we can see here, there's plenty of room in the power supply compartment and you can fit some pretty long power supplies. It's also possible to fit some really small power supplies with this SFX power supply bracket that can be used for example with this tiny Corsair SF1000. The SFX power supply bracket can be mounted as a direct replacement for the ATX power supply bracket, which is part number 8. And in the file names, these parts will clearly be marked as SFX and ATX power supply, so please pay attention to the file name, especially on the number 8s. The SFX power supply can then easily be mounted using 4 screws. As mentioned, our system can hold graphics cards up to 245mm, and even though it seems as if we have more space to use, that's not the case, as this area over here is actually reserved for our drive bay cooling fans. And I personally don't need all of this graphical power in my NAS, so I'm swapping this out with a smaller and less powerful card. It's now time to install our drive bay fans, and here we can just use regular 120mm fans, or like me, slim 120mm fans, just because I think they look nice for the video. Each of the 3 fans can now be mounted to these fan brackets, making sure that the fan is pulling air through the bracket, not pushing. Regular fan screws can be used here. As we can barely see here, tracks for the fan mounts are embedded into the drive bay sides, and installing the fan is as easy as installing a drive into the drive bay. Just push until it stops, and repeat this for all 3 fans. The idea with the airflow here is that the fans pull in air from the air intake in the back of the case in between all the drives, and then pushes it into the case for the other parts. We can also add a 4th fan in the back of the case next to the I/O shield. This one screws directly onto the chassis using regular fan screws and helps to exhaust any hot air accumulated from the GPU or CPU. We can now start adding some cables and do some cable management. One thing to keep in mind is that if you're using a big CPU cooler, the 8-pin CPU power socket and some fan headers at the top might be difficult to reach. So in those situations, it might be wise to pre-install some of the cables before dropping into place the CPU cooler. Jumping a little in time, here you can see an example on how you can manage the cables for the motherboard, fan and PCIe power cables. What's important here is just to keep the cables out of the fan blades and also try not to obstruct the airflow too much. I actually had to get a little creative here on the CPU power cable, as it was barely long enough to reach the connector. So I actually used some zip ties to act as a spacer on both sides of the fan frame to keep the cables separated from the spinning fan blade. Now, as you probably expect, when building a case with 12 hard drives, there will be a ton of cables. Therefore, cable management is very important to keep some control of the mess. These 3 brackets are specifically designed to allow for both vertical and horizontal zip tie anchor points. These simply screw into the drive base using 3 screws each and are a massive help in managing the cables. As we connect the cables, we can simply zip tie any loose ends to the anchor points as we go, and with some patience, we should be able to make something that looks pretty decent. When it comes to the SATA cables, due to the limited room in front of the drives, it was necessary for me to make a pretty sharp bend to my cables. This is not ideal, and I highly recommend getting cables that have pre-angled connectors if you can. Again, here with some patience, we should be able to manage the cables in a pretty decent way. I'm actually using 1 meter long cables here, and they turned out to actually be quite practical to be able to route them around the back edge of the case to keep them out of the way nice and tidy. When we're done, our cable management actually doesn't look too bad, much thanks to all the zip tie anchor points allowing us to route the cables in any direction we want. The most important thing here is just to keep in mind that no cables must stick out past the edge of the case body. This way we can ensure that the magnetic panel sits flush against the body. We're almost done now. We just need to add our 12mm power button to the hole in the upper back of the case and secure it in place using the supplied nut. The side panel can now be dropped into place, and we'll move on to some optional parts, like this PCIe slot cover. This is not necessary but is available if you want to use it. It simply hooks onto the PCIe slot edge and is secured using 2 M3 screws from the back. The only thing left now, and this is also completely optional, is to add the logo insert in the front. The logo can also be left as it is for a more discreet look, but if we want to add some contrast to the front, we can simply glue the logo pieces into place. Just be careful not to use too much glue though, because as you can see, I had a little gluing accident literally on the last final touch of the case. Try not to be like me. Despite the gluing accident right before the finish line, I am super thrilled with the overall outcome of this project. I'm especially proud of this 9-panel joint that made up the magnetic side panel. This proves that with enough patience, through trial and error, almost anything is possible if you're dedicated enough to just making it work. Even though it appears to be quite simple, the simple solutions are often the solutions that take the longest to figure out. If you're interested in building this project for yourself, feel free to check out the project files and written project instructions through the printables link down below. When it comes to what exact hardware to use and how to actually set up a proper NAS, I'm very new and inexperienced. Therefore, I'm not comfortable recommending any specific parts for this build or doing any kind of NAS related testing for this video. I highly recommend that you do your own research as to what parts are best for your specific needs. If you have any questions about this design, suggestions for improvements, or completely unrelated suggestions for future projects, feel free to leave a comment down below and I'll do my best to give you a prompt reply. I want to give a huge shout out to FlexiSpot for sponsoring this video with their E7 Plus standing desk. Again, I can highly recommend that you check them out if you're in the market for a new desk. I also want to give a shout out to my friend Brian C. Moses for helping me out with a ton of NAS related questions during development of this case. He runs a small YouTube channel and also has a blog where he writes about his NAS building experiences, and he's been a big help in making this build possible. I'll leave a link to some of his content down below. Thank you all for watching, I hope you enjoyed this build. If you did, feel free to leave a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel so you don't miss out on my upcoming project builds.